The police believed this was just an isolated case. No signs of forced entry, nothing of value missing. No one heard any cries for help. But 18 years later, they would realize they were wrong from the very beginning. In 1988, in a residential area of Bayan City, Gansu Province, a case unfolded that no one expected would stretch across nearly 2 decades. The victim was a young woman living alone in a small apartment. When police arrived, there were no clear signs of a break-in. The door wasn't forced. Nothing inside had been ransacked, which raised a question immediately. How did the killer get in? And why did she open the door? Neighbors were questioned. No one heard screaming. No one saw anything suspicious entering or leaving the area that night. Some remembered the light in her room had stayed on very late, but no one thought much of it. No witnesses, no clear evidence. The case quickly became a dead end. Investigators started with the closest possibilities, people the victim knew, friends, co-workers, anyone who had recent contact. Some appeared nervous, others couldn't clearly recall their timelines, but in the end, every single one of them had an explanation. The "someone she knew" theory slowly collapsed. Another possibility emerged, a burglary that turned into murder. But the scene didn't support it. Nothing valuable was taken, no signs of searching. If it was theft, what was the motive? And if it wasn't, then what was the killer looking for? As they looked closer, one detail stood out. The victim lived alone, kept to herself, minimal contact with neighbors, which meant, if someone had been watching her for long enough, they could have known exactly when she was alone, when no one else was around. This didn't feel random anymore. It suggested selection. And yet, at that time, there wasn't enough to prove this was part of something larger. No similar cases before, no pattern to compare. The case was documented, filed away, and despite the unanswered questions, the investigation slowly lost momentum. No one knew this wasn't just one case. It was the beginning of something much larger, a sequence that would continue for nearly 2 decades. After the first case, life in Bayan slowly returned to normal. No new information, no clear suspect. The file was pushed aside, like so many unsolved cases. But just a few years later, another call came in, and the details were too familiar to ignore. The victim, again, a young woman, living alone. No signs of forced entry, the door intact, nothing of value taken. The method, the setting, the circumstances, almost identical to the first case. The only difference was time. Now the question changed. Was this coincidence, or the same person? Investigators reopened the old file, placed the 2 cases side by side, and that's when the smaller details began to stand out. The way the victim was approached, The way the apartment was navigated, the absence of clear evidence. All of it followed the same logic. This no longer felt like 2 separate incidents. The investigation expanded. Police began re-examining the entire area, focusing on people who could approach victims without raising suspicion. Workers nearby, regular faces in the neighborhood, even those with legitimate reasons to knock on doors. Repairmen, delivery workers, anyone who could move unnoticed. Several names surfaced. Some had been seen near both locations. Some had unclear schedules. Some had drawn quiet concern from neighbors. Each one was questioned, watched, their pasts reviewed. But the result was the same as before. Not enough evidence. At the same time, another theory emerged. Maybe the killer didn't live there. Maybe he only appeared at specific moments, chose his target, and left. That would explain why no one recognized a familiar face, why there were no clear witnesses. So, the police widened the net. They looked at people who moved between areas, jobs that required travel, people not tied to a single place. But that path quickly became too broad, too many names, too little evidence. By now, one thing was clear. If this was the same person, he wasn't acting randomly. He chose his victims. He chose the timing. And most importantly, he left behind
Almost nothing. And just as investigators began to realize they might be dealing with someone highly calculated, a third case happened, and this time, all doubt was gone.
The third case forced everything to change. The police could no longer treat these as separate incidents. They began to see it as a connected sequence. When all three crime scenes were placed side by side, a pattern started to emerge, clearer with each detail. The victims were all young women, living alone, limited social connections, few people who would notice their daily routines. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables taken, and the method suggested something else. The killer had time to stay at the scene without being detected. From that point on, the investigation narrowed. Police began focusing on individuals who could move between residential areas without drawing attention, people whose presence wouldn't raise suspicion, workers who traveled between locations, people with legitimate reasons to appear at someone's door, and especially those who could knock at sensitive hours without being questioned. The suspect list became smaller, but each name was examined far more carefully. One direction stood out: men with a history of harassment or violence against women. Old records were reopened, past offenders brought back into focus. Some were questioned again. A few couldn't fully explain where they had been at certain times. Some showed signs of unusual anxiety, but one by one, after cross-checking evidence, they were eliminated. At the same time, another possibility was explored. Maybe the killer knew the victims, but not closely enough to be noticed. People who worked in the same areas, those with brief contact, security guards, technicians, even individuals who had done repair work inside the buildings. All of them were reviewed carefully, but once again, no name fit all the cases. Meanwhile, a small but critical detail began to stand out: the timing. All three attacks happened within similar windows, moments when the neighborhoods were quiet, fewer people outside, but still normal enough for a stranger to appear without suspicion. That meant one thing: the killer wasn't just choosing victims, he was choosing time with precision. By now, investigators began to understand they were dealing with someone patient, someone who understood the environment, someone who knew how to move without leaving a trace. And yet, even with a narrow direction, they still had nothing concrete, no identity, no direct evidence. And then, while the investigation was still ongoing, the killer made his first mistake. But at the time, no one realized how important it was. After the third case, the police made a decision. They went back to everything, every file, every detail, and this time, they focused on one thing: anyone who had appeared near multiple crime scenes. During that review, one man stood out. He lived in the same area as the first two victims: an electrician, someone who regularly moved between buildings, someone who had a reason to knock on doors without raising suspicion. And that mattered, because none of the victims had been forced to open their doors. When investigators checked his schedule, they found something else.
He had been in the area during the time frames of at least two of the cases. A neighbor even recalled seeing him near a stairwell one evening, without any clear reason to be there. For the first time, the police had someone who seemed to fit. He was brought in for questioning. At first, he remained calm, answered everything, explained that his work didn't follow a fixed schedule. But as the questions became more specific, his answers started to shift. There were gaps, moments he couldn't clearly account for, and that was enough to deepen suspicion. Surveillance followed. For days, his tools were checked, his clothing, even the places he had worked. But the deeper they looked, the more something didn't add up. Despite being near the scenes, there was no direct link, no physical evidence, no connection to all of the victims. And most importantly, one of the murders had happened at a time when he was somewhere else, in a location with multiple witnesses. Police cross-checked everything, every statement, every timeline, and it all aligned. He had been seen, confirmed, somewhere else, at the exact time of a critical attack. The strongest suspect they had was cleared, and that was the most unsettling part. Because if someone who fit this well still wasn't the killer, then the person they were looking for was far more careful, far more precise. The investigation fell back into silence. Once again, a dead end. After eliminating the first suspect, the investigation shifted direction. If the killer wasn't someone who moved freely through residential buildings, then maybe he approached his victims another way. Someone they knew, or at least, someone they had seen before. From that point on, police began focusing on personal connections, family, friends, co-workers, and especially, anyone who had conflict with the victims, or close contact, in the days leading up to the attacks. During that process, one name stood out: a man who had pursued one of the victims and been rejected. He didn't live in the same area, but he had been seen near her workplace multiple times. Some acquaintances mentioned his behavior felt off, watching from a distance, trying to start conversations, even when she showed no interest. It was the kind of pattern that immediately drew attention, because it fit the theory of a chosen target. When he was brought in, his demeanor was different, more tense than the previous suspect. He admitted he had tried to pursue her, but denied any involvement in the crimes. Then came the timeline. When asked about specific moments, his answers were unclear. There were gaps, periods of time he couldn't fully account for. That was enough to raise suspicion again: a personal motive, observed behavior. No solid alibi. Everything seemed to align. So, the investigation went deeper. His movements, his relationships, the places he frequently visited. Everything was checked, cross-referenced, reconstructed. And then, the problem appeared. He was only connected to one victim. There was no link to the others. The timelines didn't match. The locations didn't match. Even with the gaps in his statements, there was no way to place him at every scene. Which meant, if he was responsible, then he wasn't acting alone. But there was no evidence of anyone else. No indication of a group. In the end, after reviewing everything, the police had no choice. He was cleared. Once again, they thought they were close. And once again, everything collapsed back to zero. After years of investigation, with no results, the case slowly fell into silence. There were no clear suspects, no new evidence, and the killer had completely disappeared from the police's view. The files were archived, the cases unofficially frozen. For a long time, nothing happened. No similar incidents, no new victims, and many began to believe the killer had left the area, or simply stopped. But the truth was, he was still there. No one just knew it. Years later, as DNA technology advanced and became more widely used, investigators made a decision. They reopened the case. Evidence collected from the original scenes, materials that once held no value, were now the most important clues. Everything was re-examined, carefully, thoroughly. And then, a result. All the cases were connected to one person. For the first time, the police had certainty. This wasn't multiple offenders. It was one man, acting over years, without ever being identified. But DNA alone wasn't enough. There was no name, no face, no record, just a sequence of data, with no identity attached. So they changed their approach. Instead of searching for the killer directly, they searched for his bloodline. DNA samples were collected across the region. Hundreds of people, then thousands, tested, compared, analyzed. The process took months, with no clear result, until one sample appeared. Not a perfect match, but close enough to matter. The man who provided it was not the killer, but he was related. From there, investigators worked backward. Family records, relatives, connections. The list of possibilities shrunk from hundreds to just a few. And among them, one man stood out. No criminal record, no obvious warning signs. A completely ordinary life. But his DNA matched perfectly. After nearly 20 years, the police had finally found the man they had been looking for. After the DNA match was confirmed, the list narrowed to one man, Gao Qingyang. He lived in Bayan, right there, in the same city. He had a normal job, a family, no criminal record, nothing that would make anyone suspicious. To his neighbors, he was quiet, reserved, unremarkable, the kind of person no one looks at twice. And that was exactly why he had never appeared on any suspect list. In 2016, police moved in. The arrest was quick, unexpected. There was no real resistance. During interrogation, he remained silent at first, but the evidence was undeniable. DNA doesn't lie, and slowly, he began to confess. From the first case, in 1988, to the ones that followed, every single one had been committed by him alone. He described everything: how he approached his victims, how he chose them, how he made sure not to leave evidence. What investigators had spent years guessing was finally confirmed. No accomplices, no coincidence, just one man, repeating the same method over nearly 2 decades, without being caught. In 2018, the court sentenced him to death. The verdict came after all evidence was verified and his confession fully recorded. It was the official end to a case that had lasted almost 20 years. Years of false leads, wrong directions, suspects who were eventually cleared, and all along, the killer had been right there. He never left the city, never changed his identity, never disappeared. He lived in plain sight, walked the same streets, passed by people who never once suspected him. After the sentence, the case was closed. The files finally complete. The victims finally had answers. But for many, the most disturbing part wasn't what he did. It was this: that the man responsible for everything had been there all along, and no one ever noticed.